Ish. Moment now. Ball is going across as we speak.
Oh, we're live. Lovely. Okay. So I would formally like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Place Services and Economic Growth Policy and Scrutiny Committee. For those who are joining us remotely via probably YouTube, those present in the room are members of the committee and any substitutes that are attending, and the officers involved in the cases that we're dealing with. We are once again here in Committee Room 1, which is our hybrid meeting room. There are a few points which I will repeat. I have repeated before, but it's worth repeating again. Speakers and cameras will track you and pick you up as you start to speak. That means that what we would like you to do is to speak clearly and preferably do not whisper. Sorry if you've got a soft tone voice, but we need a bit of noise. And with that comes, of course, a condition. With that comes a bit of a problem, because the ceiling microphones are very, very sensitive. And some people have found, to their disappointment, that it picks up virtually everything you say. So if you want to have a quiet word with your colleague or you want to make a comment, bear in mind it's very likely to get recorded, and on YouTube that means it's there forever. So it's, as I say, it's particularly important about that because we are live streaming. In technical terms, we're not expecting a fire drill this morning, so if an alarm does sound, please follow the officers out of the building, and we are to gather in the cathedral grounds outside. The only final thing is, if you have a second device or a telephone, can I ask you to remotely make sure that it's switched off, and try and make sure we're 100% concentrating on the meeting itself. So we start with the agenda. Item number 1 is membership apologies, substitutions and declarations of interest. Justin.
Thank you, Chairman. So we've had apologies from Councillor Gadd and Councillor Newport and Councillor Wiles. Councillor Barker is subbing for him today. And Councillor Scordist and Councillor Sheldon will both be joining us. They're just in other meetings or running late. They will be joining the meeting.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest to be made by members at this stage? If not, please feel free to. There we are. Good morning, Paul. If you've got any declarations of interest you want to make, please feel free to make them now or at any time during the meeting. Moving on to item 2, minutes from the last meeting. We now need to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of December 23. For the members of the committee, I'm assuming there is nobody in the room that hasn't had them. Yes? Good. I think that's tautology, isn't it? It's 2 negatives. There's nobody in the room that hasn't had them. Sorry?
Very poor, isn't it?
I remember that. So basically around that, are we happy to approve the minutes? Great, thank you. We're also asked to make a note of the matters arising on page 8. Any notes about the matters arising? Yeah, of course.
So on the matters arising, so as the Chairman says, page 8, local highway panels. I have been assured by officers that the information that the committee has requested will be circulated after the meeting. So just to give some assurances that information will be coming through. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, move on to item number 3, which is questions from the public. We didn't have any as of yesterday. Do we have any now?
No questions.
Questions from the public. Move on to item 4, which is pages 10 to 14 of your agenda, which is the works programme and the communications review. We're asked to note the current work programme on pages 12 to 14. And as always, stress the point, everybody stresses the point, this is meant to be a member-led committee. If any member on behalf of themselves, their division or any other part of Essex wishes to bring an item forward for scrutiny, then please feel free to do so, and we'll discuss putting it on the works programme. Susan.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I note that a paper is going to Cabinet next week from the Cabinet Member for Highways, allocating large tranches of new capital funding. I thought it might be interesting to hear, for example, there is 333,000 for school lights. That's a new tranche of capital being drawn down from somewhere else. And there are loads of other similar pots. I thought it might be interesting to hear from the Cabinet Member how those are going to be allocated, how we bid for them. Is there already a list? I've already sort of put a toe in the water saying 2 of my schools on main roads want replacement wigwags because there is very difficult to get these repaired or replaced because it doesn't really fall anywhere. But if you have a look at that cabinet paper, there are splodges of money going to all different areas, additional money. And I just thought it might be interesting to hear from the cabinet member sooner rather than later on how an individual member bids for some of that, or
Sure. That seems to make,
whether it's a total officer priority. I don't know.
that seems to make common sense, but does it have to come through us or?
I don't
As a
know.
member, we should be doing that anyway, shouldn't we?
Yes, but not every member reads every cabinet paper. I happened to read them yesterday and pick it up. But if you don't go into the detail of reading it, just read the headlines. And I just wondered, we don't necessarily need him here, we could have an officer here.
Okay.
But just to, you've allocated all this extra money, how will it be doled out?
That sounds, we could always ask for an update.
Yep, a written.
But everybody happy for that?
Yeah,
On that basis then, can I just suggest we've got one point about the lights. If any of you have issues you think might crop up or you might point us in the right direction, Susan.
Well, yeah, the cabinet papers were issued yesterday or the day before. You have to follow the link now, but there are lots of tranches of money, is what I'm saying, and have they already got projects allocated to these, or can members say, please?
Okay, so if we're going to ask for an update, that's one thing. But if we're going to ask for an update on things which concern us, then we can ask you to make sure that you focus your points through to Justin, and just so that when we're asking for an update, including so and so, so and so, and I'll make sure your streetlight thing is included. Anybody else, any questions on that? Good, okay. Item 5, we now welcome to the meeting Councillor Peter Schweer. Peter, good morning. Who is commonly known as the Climate Czar. He's the Cabinet Member for Waste Reduction and Recycling. And joining Councillor Schweer on his team are Sam Kennedy. Sam, nice to see you. He's the Director of Environment and Climate Action. Jason Searles, who is Head of Waste Policy and Circular Economy. Jason. Katie Chambers. Katie, nice to see you. Circular Economy Development Manager. So last June, the committee members received a briefing on the draft waste strategy and plans for the eventual consultation. The presentation they're going to do, which is already included in your presentation or has already been included in your agenda pack. And they're now going to update us on the public consultation responses, draft strategy and proposed next steps. And after the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions. Would you prefer questions on the hoof, or would you prefer to have the questions stored up at the end?
I think, Chair, we would prefer to have questions stored up at the end, because I am hoping that as we go through the presentation, or as Jason and Katie will go through the details of the presentation, that may well help you answer some of the questions or doubts that you may have. So I would encourage that approach, if that's okay with you. And
perfectly okay, and it's good that we ask about it to start off with. So, Councillor Schweer, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for inviting us back. Last June doesn't seem very far away. It seems we're here very quickly again. As you made in your introduction, Chair, we're here to update you on the new joint waste strategy for Essex. And of course, it's well to remember that the last time we agreed a joint strategy was way back in 2009. So an awful lot has changed since then. not only in the actual way that we deliver the services, but also in the amount that is being delivered because of the growth over Essex. So as you can imagine, this is a very important piece of work, and it has been delivered, and I want to emphasise the point, it's been delivered in partnership with all of our district boroughs and cities. So there's 12 of them with us, it makes 13, and this has been a culmination basically of 2 years work. So there's a lot of work gone into this. The draft strategy is going to prioritise the waste reduction, reuse and recycling, and you will have seen that in the paper about the waste hierarchy and the change in emphasis towards a more circular economy. And this is important because it's also in there stretching the targets and the ambitions with which the residents are very keen for us to stretch as well, but also to see what more that we can do. So overall, as a result of that consultation, which we ran last autumn for 3 weeks, and we'll hear a lot more detail shortly from Jason and Katie, was run for 10 weeks, and it was a best-in-class consultation, and we had over 4,500 responses. So there was amazingly a really good strategy there, but what was important was that there was very good levels of support for all of the key principles in that strategy. And you'll hear again about how we went about the consultation process. So I want to now pass over to Katie and Jason, who basically are going to give you an overview of that public consultation process and what the people effectively said to us and mentioned, and the feedback that we're taking from that, and how that is helping us to create a final version of the strategy. And more importantly, it's going to outline the next steps to a forward-looking strategy, which is what this strategy is all about. And of course, this affects the next 30 years across Essex, taking into account the amount of growth and what we need to do. So as mentioned, Chair, we'd like to keep the questions to the end if possible. And I'm now going to hand over initially to Jason and Katie to take you through details.
Thank you very much, Councillor Schwer. As was mentioned, we're going to quickly run through the presentation that was incorporated within your agenda pack. As I say, if there's anything that you're really unclear on, you don't understand, then do ask a question while we've got the slide up. But as I say, if there's any particular questions, we can deal with those at the end. Go forward the slide, please. I just really wanted to set the scene before we go into the detail of what residents said to us in terms of the responses to the consultation. Just a very quick reminder about the purpose of the strategy. It is a shared joint strategy, so it's not Essex County Council owned strategy. It's a policy document that is being developed by the Essex Waste Partnership. So that's all 13 authorities, so the 12 district, borough and city councils, as well as the county council. We obviously all have a role to play in terms of waste management. The district, borough and cities are there to collect waste from householders and to arrange recycling of waste and to clean our streets. And the county council has that role in terms of provision of recycling centres and also disposing of the waste that's collected from households within the county. So it's really important that we have a strategy that brings those statutory bodies together and we can actually develop an approach which works hand in hand and delivers the best outcome for the residents of Essex. As Councillor Schwer mentioned, the current strategy was adopted a number of years ago, so it's well up for a refresh. The world in which we're operating in has changed significantly over the last 10, 15 years since the last strategy was adopted. We've got new changes in legislation that have already come into force and further changes that will come into place over the coming years. So it's important that we reflect on that, and also technology, ambition, and the needs of our residents have also changed over that period. So again, it's important that we reflect that within the strategy. The strategy document itself, as I mentioned when we were last here, has been developed collaboratively So it's been all of the districts working together on that. And I just wanted to touch on the key elements within the strategy, just as a quick reminder before I ask Katie to walk through what the outcomes of the consultation process were. The strategy itself very much focused around providing a framework for how we deliver waste management over the next 30 years. It doesn't go into, it's not looking at individual detail of the exact mechanisms for delivery of services, but trying to set a direction of travel in terms of overall ambition of what we're trying to achieve, as well as the core technology choices that we're proposing for the treatment and management of waste. So in terms of the overall ambition, it's very much focused around driving waste down, so reducing the overall amount of waste that's generated within the county, maximising the reuse and recycling of waste. So really trying to get maximum value out of materials, both to protect the environment, but also to drive down the overall cost of dealing with waste. We're in that really, I suppose, good position that the environmentally the right thing to do is also often the best value for money as well. So we need to drive those two things together. Also, the strategy is proposing, and this is the basis of the consultation we put out there. The strategy is proposing that that waste that can't be reused or recycled no longer goes to landfill. So at the moment we send that material to landfill. The strategy is quite clear that that is not a long-term solution, and is proposing we cease the use of landfill by 2030. And instead, the material that we can't reuse or recycle, we look to use energy from waste. So that's where the material will go through a incineration type process to capture energy that is then used, energy and heat rather, which is then used to produce power and electricity. So they're sort of the key sort of elements of the draft strategy that we put out to consult on. It also focused very much on the need to ensure that the services that we offer to our residents support them to make those right choices, recognising that we need to have a really strong service provision, whether that's service from the county or services from our district partners. Those services need to be in place to be able to support residents with making that transition and actually improving the amount of waste that they use or recycle. I'll pass over to Katie, who will go through the key feedback we had through the consultation, and then I'll pick up and talk through just the next steps that we're going to take as we move towards adoption.
Thank you. So as Councillor Shreer already said, we ran a 10-week public consultation in the autumn. As part of that consultation, we published obviously the draft strategy and a suite of supporting documents, and we asked residents and other respondents to give us their views through a series of quantitative questions, asking for their level of agreement with the proposals and ideas contained in the strategy, but also giving an opportunity throughout the survey to give us their qualitative feedback as well, so their thoughts and comments on the proposals. Although the primary hosting of that survey and all the documents was online, we also made the set available in all of our libraries, and we offered alternative formats. So we sent out paper copies on request, but we also offered the opportunity for those residents who needed to go through the strategy and answer the questions on the telephone as well. And as Councillor Shreer alluded to, we worked really closely with the Consultation Institute to give us it's actually very much a collaborative process. So it's an external quality assurance, but they work with us throughout the design of the consultation process and the delivery period. And they're continuing to work with us now to make sure that everything that we're doing is best practice, but also that we're ensuring that we're taking into account all of the feedback provided as we go through the consideration phase. One of the things that sometimes in consultations, I guess, councils struggle with is getting a response to the consultation exercise. We worked very hard. We had a very robust communications programme deployed across a lot of different channels, everything you'd expect digitally, but also, again, advertising through the library network, reaching out through our partners, through parish and town councils, through the district borough and city councils as well, to ask them to invite residents to participate in the consultation process. And we ran a number of events. So we did direct engagement with parish and town councils through the Essex Association of Local Councils, through the rural, let's get the acronym wrong, the RCCE as well. That's the one. I get the words in the wrong order. And to special interest groups, but we also ran public events as well. So those were both in person and online. So the objective there was to really talk about the principles of the strategy and the opportunities and challenges faced in dealing with Essex's waste for the next 30 years, and to encourage those people that attended and engaged with us to complete the consultation survey. In terms of the response that we received, we were pleased to receive over 4,500 responses. The majority were received online, but were both on what was the full survey and also through the easy read version that was made available for people who wanted to engage with it, just in a kind of simpler and a shorter survey. There was good representation across the county. And we did also receive formal responses from partners within the Waste Partnership, from parish and town councils, and a small number from business as well. In common with many consultations, we did receive an over-representation when you look at the population, from female respondents over male and from older age groups. Again, throughout that consultation process, we did look at how we were communicating to see if there were different ways to reach into those different audiences and communities. For example, we actually used an ad van in certain localities for a period of time within the consultation to try and encourage response from the Harlow and Epping Forest area, where we still received slightly lower response than the population demographic called for. But on the whole, it was a very good rate of response. And in terms of a high-level view of what people have told us, and you can see here visually that there was a good agreement with all of the principles contained within the draft strategy. This was also across all localities. So although this looks at it from a perspective of the principles proposed, when you look at it geographically, you would see a similar representation. You might notice that not sure as a response, that's the yellow block, was a little higher on circular economy. And when you look at the commentary, and that was one of the strengths of the consultation, that we gave the opportunity for comments against each of the principles, you can see that the commentary there was really looking for retailers, manufacturers to do more to reduce their packaging. So people who were responding were really thinking about what needed to change in order to achieve the objective of the strategy. Whereas you can see not sure is actually very small on the recycling line, which demonstrates that confidence, and something that we see in our resident research as well, that for the majority of people, recycling feels like an everyday behaviour, so very familiar. Whereas prevention, the not sure, is a little higher again. And again, it comes to that feeling of not quite sure how to do it, how to deliver the change. You will notice also that anaerobic digestion, so the process by which we treat food waste, has a higher not sure. And again, we looked at that through a focus group activity and the commentary, and it was that the majority of respondents weren't quite sure about the meaning of the term. So during the consultation process, we deployed an animation to try and help residents and other respondents understand what we meant by the process. And that's something that we can look to do more of, to make sure that we're explaining some of those terms, or maybe using simpler language if we need to make sure we're being really clear. And you'll see that the response to the use of energy from waste, once we've recycled, reused as everything we can, was also quite positive. And there was a good level of agreement with the other principles around collaboration and research and working with residents in the future. In terms of the targets and ambitions, again, we had a feeling that most respondents told us that they felt that these were about right. For those that were not sure, actually they tended towards wanting to see higher targets, or targets that were achieved sooner. And the response on ambitions was almost identical. But what, again, you would have seen in the free text commentary there was that people were keen to understand how achievable the targets were, and they made a connection with the types of services they receive as important to whether or not they felt the targets and ambitions were achievable. Alongside the strategy document, we also published a strategic environmental assessment. So this was quite a complex report. We received responses from statutory bodies that were asked to consult upon it, but we also received a number of responses from the wider population effectively. And you'll see here that although there was general agreement, that there was more of a divided response. So we're looking closely at that at the moment to see again if there's anything that we need to adjust. But broadly, we were pleased to receive some degree of response on it, and perhaps more than we expected. So in terms of some of the kind of general findings from the consultation process, as I've said, we had a good level of agreement that was applied geographically. There was a slightly lower level of agreement with proposals for those respondents living in the Basildon area, but broadly it was a very good level of response. And what we, one of the things that we wanted to look at, we will look at as we move forward, is you'll notice that the vision of a zero waste county, the wording we've used was misunderstood. And I think that's right. There was some doubt about whether zero waste was achievable, and it led to a more divided response on that particular question. So that's the type of language we can look at. You'll see we've also drawn out here the point about the language around anaerobic digestion as something we want to make sure that we're being clear so that people that can engage with the process and understand the benefits of it, because it's one of the most significant opportunities for us to reduce waste and to reduce the environmental impact of waste as well. What was particularly pleasing was that strong agreement to the principles of councils working in collaboration. So, as we've already said, this strategy was developed in partnership between the 13 authorities. And that's something residents are keen to continue to see evolve further as we move beyond the draft stage and into delivery. I think I'm handing back to Jason.
Thank you very much. Just go forward, thanks. So what happens next? We're now very much in this consideration phase. So we've received this wealth of information back from residents in terms of their views around the draft strategy. It's important now that as a partnership of local authorities, we come together to consider those responses and look to see what changes we may now need to do to the draft strategy before we move forward to recommending this for adoption by the individual authorities. As Katie said, we're in a really good position that the core elements of the strategy were well supported. So we're not looking at making significant changes to the proposed policy direction that was contained within the strategy. But there are things that we do need to do. Certainly there was some responses and views around some of the language that we'd used within the strategy, that we needed to look at how we simplify that, and also looking at how we link our actions more clearly with the targets and the ambition, so that people could understand how we were going to actually deliver against this ambition. And I think that sort of almost comes back to this sort of view that, you know, sometimes talk is cheap. You know, you can make all of these sort of, you know, very strong, statements around ambition, but unless you back them up with some more detail around how you're going to achieve them, they can sometimes ring a little bit hollow. So it was important, again, from, you know, the responses, particularly the free text responses that came alongside the consultation from residents. You know, that's where we've really been able to pull out the detail and the narrative to really understand what changes that we need to take. So although this consideration phase is happening now, and obviously it is subject to agreement across the whole partnership, I'll briefly sort of run through where we think some of the key changes are going to take place. As Katie mentioned, certainly this issue around the ambition for zero waste didn't really resonate very well with large proportions of the population. They found it confusing. They didn't really understand what it meant. So we need to perhaps revisit that vision just to make it a little bit simpler and clearer in terms of what we want to achieve. Try and refocus this very much around the language of waste reduction, reuse and recycling, which is quite familiar to residents, but also ensure that there is a strong link between those activities and value for money. Because again, there was a strong concern coming through from residents that the ambition within the strategy was going to lead to either more complexity within waste services, higher costs for residents. And again, that's something that we need to strongly address within the strategy to make sure that there is that clear link with value for money and customer or resident focused services, so we can make these things as simple as possible. And again, that was a very strong message that was coming through from residents. They want simple to use, easy to understand services, and they wanted support from their councils to help them make the right decision. So again, a strong sort of change or a strong emphasis within the strategy that we'll look to finally adopt will need to be drawn out around this education and support element for residents. Certainly the issues around businesses and the role of businesses and the role of central government in terms of getting change was again a strong thing that was coming through. So within the final strategy, we're also looking to pull out the role of councils around lobbying. So that's lobbying for change within government. So we have the right and appropriate regulations in place to deliver better waste systems and reduce waste, but also the role of businesses that they need to play. So again, members of the public, we're really keen that we take a much stronger lobbying role as local authorities and act almost as the guardians for what residents need to achieve in terms of moving this situation forward. The other aspect that came through quite strongly was the issue around how we keep this document up to date. So we were proposing within the strategy that we review the strategy every 5 years. Residents really felt strongly that there was lots of things happening, lots of things are going to change, and we needed to keep on top of this much more frequently. So again, what we are discussing within the partnership at the moment is at a much more frequent review period, possibly annually, linking that very neatly in with action planning and reporting processes, so we can really keep on track of how we're progressing to enable our residents to hold councils to account in terms of delivery against this strategy. The other aspect that again really came through, which we will be looking in terms of the final design of the strategy, is again, as I say, being clear about the activities and actions that we're going to take. Now, we need to be a little bit careful here because obviously there will be an action planning programme, so we'll be developing some very clear action plans about what we're going to do, but we wanted to ensure that there is a really good flavour within the strategy document itself, so again people can understand the sorts of things that we're proposing to do as local authorities. So again, what we want to do within the final strategy document is to make that much clearer for residents, so they can get a feel for the sorts of changes or sorts of activities that local authorities will be delivering to deliver against this strategy. In terms of the timeline and adoption, we've got a lot to do, just in terms of getting this document tidied up and getting the agreement across a partnership of authorities. But we are proposing that the strategy itself will be ready for adoption by the summer. And at this stage, we are looking to take this to Council's Cabinet in June this year, with and aligning that also with the district and borough and city council. So we'll see that adoption across the board happening over the summer months. And what you will see is that this will be done in a way where it is very much a strong partnership piece. So you'll see a consistency across the partnership in terms of adoption, which again I think is really important. This has been developed collaboratively, and equally we would want to see it adopted collaboratively. So you would have seen this within the slide deck. I'm not going to go this in because I've already this, but it just highlights where we are in terms of key activity. We've obviously been doing a lot over the last couple of months since the consultation period ended, just to make sure that we have properly and fully analysed all of their responses and relayed those back into the partnership discussion. Over the next couple of months, we are working, very hard on turning that draft document into a final document. Some of that is just simply tidying it up in terms of removing a lot of the explanatory text around, this is a draft, and making it a more relevant final document. But also some of it will be picking up on the elements that came through from the consultation. And as I say, we're very much focused now on, getting into a position that by June this year, we'll be ready to table this for adoption through our governance process with districts and boroughs adopting, at the same time or shortly after. I think that was everything I needed to touch on. I mean, there's a few discussion points and just suggestions that we wanted to just put forward to committee in terms of just framing some of the thoughts. We're obviously really keen to consider how we engage further with this committee in terms of development and delivery of the strategy ambitions, and particularly in terms of some of the action planning reporting processes, and when we start looking at the performance outputs from the partnership in terms of delivering against this strategy. So I will leave those there and hand back to the chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything to summarise on, or?
Not really, Chair. I think you've seen from what Jason and Katie have done was the extensive amount of communications and also the length of the consultation and the fact that it's been independently reviewed. And as Katie mentioned, it's a best in class. This is a culmination of 2 years' work coming. So, we're pleased to come, before you and give you all of the details of this. And what's really important is that, as Jason mentioned, is that the key principles have all been agreed with quite strongly in the presentation that Katie gave you there. And that the key principles have all been really agreed. So it's just adjusting this language. And of course, what's really going to be really necessary is that continued collaboration with our waste partners going forward and getting this going so that the strategy can be adopted by hopefully all of those partners concerned.
Okay, thank you. I'll just go around the table. Just who wants to speak? You do that. Okay. One side and the side and the side. Okay. Start with Susan.
One generic and two specifics, if I could. The generic is garden waste. In Uttleford, we collect garden waste. It's a paid-for service. The current charge is £50. They were going to put it up to £60. It's a bi-weekly service. We also have a village waste skip system, which again, the villages pay for. We can't be the only people that are paid for the service, but you're saying everybody will have access to garden waste by 2026. There's certainly nothing in the Uttleford budget this year that mentions anything about moving to that situation. 2026 isn't very far away to introduce a free garden waste service to 30,000 properties. Is not a cheap option for any council. So I'd like your thoughts on that. The other two are specifics, and they're about our civic community sites. One is furniture. Furniture now goes into a separate skip because there are things in furniture that create leachate that is not good if you put it in landfill. Have we thought about working with a social enterprise organisation or something? Because most of furniture is wood and bits of metal. If there is some foam, which we don't want to put into the system, but actually a social enterprise company or something that would actually take this stuff and put it apart, because I go at the moment it goes to incineration, which seems to me a terrible waste. So you've got 10% of the product is toxic, 90% is recyclable. So how do we do something about that? And how do we work with the private sector? Somebody knocked down a garden wall and I had it rebuilt. What do I have to do to get rid of the bricks? I have to drive 12 miles to get rid of the bricks. There are loads of farmers, aggregate places locally, but if we had a network of those that would actually take the product directly if it's clean hardcore. So rather than any of us or a builder wanting to drive miles to get rid of the stuff, they could do it locally, fewer miles, fewer whatever, and us handling, much reduced waste. Those are my three thoughts.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to leave, I'm going to ask Jason to answer most of it. But with regards to garden waste and paid charges and being free for by 26, of course, this is the primary thing that we would encourage as many residents to do as possible is to utilise that where they are, i.e. compost on site, rather than actually moving it environmentally as garden waste. So that's the initial point on that. And you're quite right about the furniture skips and pops. There are separate collections for that now. And of course, I would suggest that apart from the social attitude of perhaps being able to reuse and other companies like Lighthouse that we have at quite a few of most of our recycling centres now who can actually reuse that, providing the firm's up to standard. But of course, that brings me to the extended producer responsibility and the actual design of that. And that is what we mean by prevent. And that's in our waste hierarchy. And that is really in the importance of that. And I think that illustrates your point very well. But I'm sure Jason or Katie will want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, just taking those in turn. I mean, in terms of green garden waste, the strategy is not proposing free collections of green garden waste. It's leaving this very much to local decision. We know that there is a mix of approaches across the county, and we have some of our waste collection authorities, so the district, borough, and city councils who operate a free garden waste service, and we have others that operate as a charge for service. The strategy itself is still leaving that very much the local decision. It needs to be right for that authority and that locality. What it is proposing and what has been endorsed as we go through the development of this by all of the authorities is that every resident should be able to access a garden waste service. That may be a charge for it, may be a free, but they should be able to access that service if they wish to. We said we always encourage people to try and home compost. Because that is, the lowest impact approach to green garden waste treatment. But we know that's not right for everybody, and for some people, they will wish to use a collection type service. So, yeah, rest assured, this isn't about free services for all. That decision still sits with the individual district, borough, city councils in terms of how they run the service. The issue around furnishing, yeah, I totally agree. It's, there've been changes in legislation that came in place at the beginning of last year, which prevented or put in place some very strict processes on how we're able to deal with soft furnishings. So previously we were able to reuse a lot of soft furnishings. We were able to break them down and pull out the various recycles from them. But from the 1st of January last year, we have very limited options for soft furnishings, and at the moment that is taking them through to incineration because of the presence of persistent organic pollutants within the soft furnishings. We are, however, looking at that. We're looking at whether there is a process that we could adopt, particularly at our recycling centres, where we could segregate out some of those materials in exactly the way you're suggesting, that enables us to pull out some of the recyclable materials, so that the soft furnishing element goes off for incineration, but the wood, the metal, and those other bits actually get recycled. And only last week, the county council agreed to invest in a programme of work around trying looking at ways in which we can increase the collection and the recycling of bulky waste items such as soft furnishings. So that piece of work is happening. That was only approved last Thursday. I think the call-in period for that ends tomorrow.
Those must be burning.
So we are seeing some progress in there, and we will start to work in earnest on that activity over the coming months to really try and embed that in at our recycling centres. And I've done two of the questions. And I've
Bricks, hardcore
bricks. That's it. Thank you very much. No, again, we within the strategy, particularly within some of the action planning, we have identified this gap in terms of how do we engage more strongly with the waste management industry and the business sector in terms of plugging some of those gaps. Our recycling centres operate a great service. You know, we've got a lot of centres across the county and people, they're well used. But we do understand that for some people, there may be a commercial outlet that is much closer that can take that material, or individuals that can use that material. So again, we are looking at that. We haven't got a specific project around it at the moment, but it's certainly something that is on our radar in terms of how do we connect people more effectively and efficiently to those other service offers. You know, not everything has to come through the councils. There are lots of other groups, whether that's community groups or whether that's the business sector, who want certain materials. So yeah, we will be looking at ways in which we can join those dots more effectively.
Can I just mention, because sometimes, you know, you mentioned about the hardcore, sometimes that's actually needed by other people, and obviously most of you will have heard about Freegal. So, you know, there is also that opportunity, which I drag back to the, you know, the waste hierarchy, you know, reuse. And it's a circular economy. So people will do that, and I have seen that. So again, that is something that is about communication to residents.
Thank you. Councillor Blackwell?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Barker's question on green waste has answered one of my questions, so thank you on that. The other thing which I'm pleased you said was about a consultation, because that's always been about one of my bugbears in all local authority consultations. They tend to use words officers are all used to, but the public are not. And so if they don't understand what we're talking about, of course they won't respond. So I'm really pleased that I've been to a meeting where you've identified it for a change. So thanks for that, because I think it's a very, very important point. Because if you want people to consult with you, they've got to understand what you're talking about. And I think that's good. The other question is that, you know, how far down the line are we with all local authorities to align to what we're trying to do with our waste strategy? Because it is important that everybody is on board with, you know, what we're trying to do, because all local authorities have probably got their different ideas. So any idea where we are on that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll try and keep it short, and I'm sure I'm going to get back up from my team. But we have made quite a lot of progress in that, and of course at Essex County Council we actually brought forward the date to end of June. And we have the majority of councils now in July. There are still a few that we are trying to encourage there, because we want to show the fact that, you know, as a waste partnership, and we're working together, that would be great if we could pass it at the same time. And of course, the other thing is we've got elections in May for some authorities, and they've got a considerable workload. But we are working on that, and our end of hope is to actually try and get the whole waste partnership. And we will be talking to the waste partnership at our next meeting at the end of February about that as well, and updating. So I don't know if Jason and Katie want to add any more to that.
I would just add the comment that was made, actually, I think within the presentation pack, and we also picked up on it today, it is recognising the collaborative approach in terms of developing this. So this isn't one authority, county council or a district that's driving this forward. This is actually all of those authorities coming together to try and drive something forward, you know, in a single mass. And I think what we've found through this process is I would suggest we're in the best place we've ever been in terms of getting commonality and agreement across 13 separate authorities in terms of where we want to position ourselves, what we want to achieve. There's always going to be some variation. I think we have to recognise that, and some of those are really legitimate. You know, the services that are put in place need to work for that particular locality. So you will always have those small variations. But in terms of the core ambition, what we want to achieve, the sorts of services that we want to provide, the materials that we want to collect from residents, we are seeing now, let's say for the first time I think ever, that commonality across all of the local authorities within Essex, which I think, you know, is a real mandate to drive this stuff forward, but is also a recognition, I think, of the hard work, both at political level and with officers, in actually really trying to get ourselves into a strong position. So I'm really optimistic. As I say, we're working hard to get the strategy obviously adopted this year. That is only the start of the hard work, because obviously there needs to be all the actual planning that happens after that to really drill down, you know, the individual activities that will take place to deliver against these ambitions. But yeah, at this stage, I'm extremely optimistic.
Right. Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Councillor Fleming.
Thank you. Jason, just following on from that, do you need every district to formally adopt it by vote? What happens if they don't?
Right, the decision on adoption is taken individually by each authority, so it'll go through their normal governance process. Obviously, our ambition is that everybody adopts this. And I think it would be disappointing if we see individual authorities choosing not to adopt. I think the risk of that is very low, just on the basis that this has been developed as a joint project. It hasn't been individual authorities. We've taken this through a really strong technical and political process in terms of ensuring everybody is comfortable with each stage as we move forward. And equally, we've ensured that there is that level of flexibility within the strategy to enable those individual choices to be made in terms of some of the detail elements of the delivery. And again, coming back to this issue that it needs to be right for each authority. So again, we are very confident that everyone will adopt. If individuals don't adopt, so it will be highly disappointing. It doesn't stop the strategy moving forward. The strategy still remains a valid document. And as an example, the current strategy we have was not adopted universally by all authorities. Now, that doesn't mean that the authority, a single authority that chose not to adopt, it doesn't mean that they necessarily disagreed with large amounts of the strategy. There was small elements that they were uncomfortable with at the time. But the core part of the strategy, they were, continue to deliver on, and they continue to work with the partnership as a whole in terms of making sure that we deliver against the aspirations. So again, I think I come back to my previous comment. We're very optimistic that it will get adopted, and we will continue to work hard on that.
Good. Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a?
Of course.
Thank you, Jason. I've not been to a waste partnership meeting. Is it officers and a councillor or leader of a council? Who actually sits on the?
So we have an officer board and a member board. So the officer board is generally the heads of service or directors with responsibility for waste, and the member board attendees will be the cabinet members with responsibility for waste for each one of the authorities. Or if it's a committee structure, it will obviously be the appropriate committee chair. They are held, they're not public meetings, they're held as private meetings, which is important. It gives an opportunity then for the partnership to discuss some of those challenging issues in terms of how the services are delivered. And it's very much to focused around that joint working across the individual authorities in terms of how do we deliver against the requirements of the strategy, and also sharing that best practice in terms of driving things forward. But as I say, that with I'm sitting next to the current chairman of the member board, the chairman's discretion, I'm sure there is an invite for individual members if they wish to come along to that meeting to listen in. I'm sure that could be arranged.
Thank you, Jason.
Okay, Councillor Scordis, followed by Councillor Sheldon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just slightly concerned, you said at the start, so we're looking to stop landfill use by 2030, but then we're looking to use incinerators instead. So I'm wondering, is that really zero waste? Because we're burning some stuff that may be a bit toxic into the environment, even some plastics aren't recyclable. So there's a slight concern because we know that some councils are selling off their waste to other countries and it's being burnt as well.
Sorry, did you want to?
No, it's okay, Jason. I was going to give Jason a rest, but I think Jason is probably better to answer that than myself.
I mean, the focus for the strategy primarily is waste reduction and high levels of recycling. So I think that we need to put it in that context. The targets within the strategy, and the ambition to move towards a sort of 70% recycling rate will naturally significantly reduce the amount of waste that needs to be dealt with as black bag residual waste. The recommendation around the use of energy from waste is a recognition of the limited options that are available around treatment of residual waste. Landfill as a long-term solution for dealing with residual waste is just not an option. both in terms of the availability of landfill sites, but also the government policy approach around the continued use of landfill. So what we will see is the ability to use landfill decline significantly over the coming years, and therefore there needs to be a deliverable and technically achievable solution for dealing with what's left. And from all of the analysis and activity that's been done, energy from waste is the most appropriate way for dealing with what's left. However, we fully recognise that any waste treatment solution has negative impacts on the environment. And what we need to do is ensure that the processes and the technologies that are adopted minimise those as much as possible. What we have within the strategy is a recognition that for energy from waste, first and foremost, we need to reduce the amount of waste that's thrown away as black bag waste, because if we can do that, we can minimise the impacts. So that's why we have the high recycling and the waste reduction targets. Secondly, it's about how do you make those solutions as efficient as possible. So this is about capturing the heat alongside generating electricity, but also looking at options around carbon capture, storage and utilisation. So this is about capturing the carbon from those facilities so they don't go out into the atmosphere. And the third element, which you picked up on, is looking at the feedstock, so the material that goes into those facilities. So making sure that we really focus on driving plastic out of the residual waste stream. Plastic, as we all know, is effectively burning fossil fuel. You know, that's its origin. So if you put it into an incinerator, you are just burning a fossil fuel. So focusing very clearly on how do we pull that plastic out of black bag waste, which is why the rollout of plastic recycling collection services is really important to this strategy. And also, just focusing the minds of our residents on fully utilising the recycling services that they've got. So it's we need to be pragmatic in terms of having a deliverable solution, but equally the strategy so is focused on how do we take an approach which really mitigates and minimises the adverse impacts of all of the solutions we use. And equally, we think recycling as being a panacea. Recycling also has its negative impacts. You're moving waste around, the country. Sometimes it's going abroad. So again, thinking about how do we make sure that we have local solutions and actually deal with waste as close to its source as possible to try and mitigate those impacts.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sheldon, followed by Councillor Siddle.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. You should be very proud, I think, of the consultation done so far. One comment I would perhaps have on the consultation is I think perhaps a slight missed opportunity to, I suppose, better inform the public about the waste hierarchy in general. It's a lovely logo in the corner, but I think it would be a good idea to try and perhaps put that in there as a strategic aim. I think it's important that residents understand that. The big question I've got about the waste strategy is how it interplays with the waste local plan. Waste local plan, my understanding is that it hasn't been updated since 2017, and waste itself, because of market movements, is a very, a very dynamic market and environment. What was valuable in recycling terms a few years ago, the market's changed a lot since then, and so you've got to keep very nimble with it. So the questions I've got are they going to be, do we think that the waste local plan is going to be flexible enough to deal with this strategy? And secondly, what are going to be the effects on the likelihood of the waste local plan, well, in essence, I suppose, the waste local plan being used as a guiding document to create more energy from waste centres, for example. We have a situation in Basildon very, very recently where it was a private business came forward with an energy to waste incinerator. That application, by the way, is still going under consideration. But it was interesting to look at the planning documents to realise that areas of search there within the waste local plan were almost treated as areas of almost as planned areas for waste from energy in incinerators and recycling centres. You've got it noted in your consultation, and quite rightly so, that residents are on the whole in favour of energy from waste incinerators, but are concerned about siting. And the one concern I would have about this consultation is that particularly residents who live quite close to those areas of search, or perhaps those areas actually involved in the plan, will look at that greater emphasis and will perhaps be concerned that this will lead to far more I suppose applications in those areas for some more of those smaller centres. Don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, but I think it's something that you should be very much bear in mind, and perhaps there should be another education piece, or even perhaps a review of the actual waste local plan, because residents are going to be quite confused as to how the two interplay together as a result. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, you're quite right to mention that there are two different things, and I think Sam will come back and give you a response to that.
Just in terms of roles and responsibilities, I have to emphasise that we are concerned with the strategy for waste disposal. There is a very clear separation between this team and the work of the Essex County Council's Minerals and Waste Planning Authority, and actually we are not allowed to interact with them on the development of the waste local plan. That is their responsibility, and there's a very clear division of roles and responsibilities to avoid conflicts of interest across the different teams. So there's a different cabinet member who leads on that, and there is a different team that works on the waste local plan. The waste disposal team does not input into that process. Jason, did you want to pick up anything?
Yeah, I would just add a couple of points to that, and this is really just an education piece. So apologies if members are already, fully clear on the differential between the waste local plan and the waste strategy. So as Sam has alluded to, the waste strategy that we're talking about today is focused on how do we want to deal with the waste that we are responsible for managing. So that's the stuff that's collected from household, the waste that's cleaned from the streets, and small amounts of business waste that's also picked up by district and borough councils. The waste local plan is a planning document. It's looking at the suitability of sites for waste facilities, and it focuses broader than just the waste that's collected by councils. So it's looking at all of the waste that's generated in Essex, regardless of whether it's collected by a local authority or managed by a commercial operator. So it's very much that planning site allocation type document. What I would say, and Sam is absolutely right, that there is a clear distinction between those roles and responsibilities, but the Waste Planning Authority and development of the Waste Local Plan do need to have consideration of the waste strategy. So they will need to, and this, I don't know what the timeline is, but they will need to, once we adopt our waste strategy, they will need to look at that, and they will need to consider that in terms of what impacts that has on the waste local plan. And at some point that will undoubtedly, lead to, reviews and a refresh of that planning document, so that they have that statutory obligation to consider what we have put within the Essex Waste strategy. So undoubtedly we will see some changes on that, but as I say, that will come forward as a separate piece of work led by our Waste Planning Authority colleagues.
If I can just come back on that very quickly, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to hear that, yes, hopefully what I'm hearing from you is I think there's likely to be a bit of a review as a result of the strategy if it's passed, which is good. Just in response to Samantha, I'm sure if I think about it for more than I have already, I can probably understand exactly why there is that separation. No chance in hell that my residents are going to, which is the problem, right? So they're going to not see as much as, if I go to them and say, well, what is this going to mean for this site over here, which could have a incinerator built in 20 years, now you're placing greater emphasis on it. I can't go back to them and say, sorry, no, there's no interplay between the two of them. They're entirely separate, because they're not going to entirely understand that. I don't want to go deep into the technicalities of it, but I think what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman, is that in regards to the strategy, I think that corporately and in terms of, when people are asking questions, or our residents are asking questions of Essex County Council and of us as councillors, that we have an answer that they're going to understand. I think actually, to be honest with you, Jason's almost given it in terms of, well, this is a separate planning document. It will be reviewed once this strategy comes out is a good one. But I think we would need to, it'd be good to have that written down, to be honest, in particular in its contentious areas.
Yeah, so if I might, Chair, and absolutely, in terms of responses to queries, we have lines from the planning team, but I didn't want to give the impression that I am empowered or indeed able to speak on that topic, because we are very clearly disempowered to do so. It is very clearly, I have a duty to outline the separate roles and responsibilities here. I cannot step over that line and into that space. But as corporately, I absolutely hear your point, and we do have lines from the planning team. I'm happy to share those with, I don't, not off the top of my head, because it's not my area, I'm so sorry, but I'm really happy to share those with the committee.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Thank you. Councillor Siddle, followed by Councillor Vance.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it was a really good presentation. It sets out exactly what you're going to do, where we're going. I'm all for that. Page 23, you know I'm a plastics man. You know I've sold plastics machinery for nearly 40 years now. Eastern Plastics Machinery, no other of the machinery companies. And I think sometimes we need to be honest about what we're trying to achieve. And I look at page 23 and we talk about we will contribute to recycling, blah, 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 and net zero by 2050. Are we really being serious? You know, would be my question. The UK generates 0.9% of emissions in the world. China produces something like 30%, rest of the world 21%, India 7.3%. Have we done any numbers to study how much carbon we're offshoring? So in terms of manufacturing or shipping of goods, how much do we actually offshore to China that we're ignoring? I think it becomes a point where us politicians and the county council has to stop patting itself on the back and say, are we doing anything more? Can we do more about carbon that we've offshored? That's one question. The other question I want to ask is, there's nothing in this policy about a national policy on recycling hard plastics. Again, I sell recycling equipment. All plastics can be recycled and reused. There is not a policy because we don't have the volumes. We're not collecting the volumes of ABS, polycarbonate, nylon. If we did that, we could recycle a huge amount more plastics. And we need to be lobbying nationally to say, you know, the UK and inter-area policies that actually say we set up a policy that can actually do that, and we can recycle ABS, you know, black plastics, which we now describe as non-recyclable. It's complete rubbish. They can all be recycled. So just a thought on that. And carbon spent on collection waste. We haven't really talked about that. You did touch on it. When I was deputy leader of Braintree, I said to the leader of the council at the time and the chief executive, if you want to recycle, if collecting grass is recycling, then give me 20 bins, because my wife can fill 20 bins with the amount of grass we have to cut. Instead of being, you know, she's lazy and she doesn't go at the bottom of the garden.
Strike that from the record.
Absolutely correct. The best recycling we can do individually is to compost at home and not use carbon to collect grass. So just a thought on that as well. I've never ever seen any numbers. I'd be interested to know your thoughts.
Before we get into the...
You have a horse lawyer.
May I just come back on the simple one that Councillor Siddle made about grass and, you know, the carbon may be issued in distance that we have talked about it, but you're right to raise it again. It's of interest to a lot of people, and this is what the strategy is all about. But of course, that is the whole point of having mulch decks. You can even actually get mowers, and I've had one for 15 years now, and I've never had to recycle any portion of grass. The advantage of recycled deck, obviously, just digressing slightly, is it fertilises the grass and keeps it in good condition. So it's a lot that's there. So it's about communication and enablement. But to the more difficult questions, I'll hand over my team. I think Sam's going to.
So in terms of net zero, the UK is legally committed to be a net zero country by 2050. That's in the Climate Change Act 2008. That is in the statute book. It's been agreed by Parliament. We're all beholden to that obligation. This is not something that we, as a county council, can achieve on our own. But it is important that we are mindful of that duty when we design our services, when we're thinking about strategies, when we're thinking about our forward approach. In terms of the detailed work that was done around modelling different options here, and the underlying technical report absolutely looked at carbon dioxide emissions and methane emissions from various options. And the strategy has very much focused on choosing the lowest possible impact way forward. And we are not at a place where today we can wave a magic wand and pretend that we are going to get to a place very quickly where our waste disposal is not going to produce greenhouse gases. It is. There are not commercially available waste collection or heavy plant that is low emission. That people are starting to trial electric collection vehicles, so that you are starting to see those. There are some in London, but the plant that we operate as a county council to move waste around, big JCBs, I'm afraid that there are no commercially available alternatives. Those will come in time. In the most immediate important thing for us to do is to, as we've all discussed, reduce the amount of waste that we're generating, reuse and recycle as much as possible, and then make the most efficient use of the waste that we are disposing. So we're pulling out electricity and heat, so that we are getting the most bang for our buck in terms of power and heat generation, therefore minimising our greenhouse gas emissions from that whole waste site. In terms of offshoring, so if you want a detailed conversation around this, there is a very detailed conversation to be had. So internationally, we've agreed a framework whereby each country measures the carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide equivalent that it produces on its own land. So China is responsible for all of the things that it manufactures, even though all the things that it manufactures are bought by Europe and America, and we import that. That's not how we measure it. That's an international agreement, that's a format. But there absolutely are measures that look at the impacts of large volumes of material from other countries. If you're interested in that, I can send you a lot of detail actually around that. The answer to tackling greenhouse gas emissions has to be a collective one. It has to be something that we work collectively on, and that's where you get your international agreements, the Paris Agreement, the follow-up COPs that they continue to work to tighten down the amount of greenhouse gases that internationally we're all producing, and that has to be the way forward. This isn't something that any one country can solve on its own, and even if the UK was perfect and the rest of the world did nothing, we would still suffer the consequences of climate change. So it needs to be something where that's not straightforward, but if you're interested in the detail around how we cut carbon up and how it's measured and some of the impacts, you can look at historical contributions and contributions from goods used and imported. There are different measures to do that, and I can share that data with you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. That was really good. Just going back to the plastic waste, I think we really need to be clear about recycling, reuse and re-energy, because I see burning plastics as a source of energy. If you heat plastics to 400 degrees, it goes back to oil. 90% of the boilers in the rural areas where I live, Halstead, are oil-fired boilers. We really need to make sure that we capture and we use that energy that's generated, and that we use it. If we can get rid of 60,000 homes by burning plastic in an incinerator, and they don't have to burn oil at home, that's a fantastic thing for the planet, and we shouldn't miss that. So I think we've almost got to change the language. This is not just this is almost a secondary use of these products. It's not a first use. And of course, we shouldn't forget the huge advantage of plastic products to actually extend shelf life. So, things like bags, vegetables that are put in bags and then are carbon filled, which extends the shelf life of vegetables for up to 3 months, which would have deteriorated after a few weeks in a brown paper bag. So plastic should not be seen as a total negative, and we do need to reuse or recycle that wherever we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vance, followed by Councillor Crowe.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just like to touch on three elements, if I may, that you've talked about today, just to get a little bit more understanding. One of them I'll follow up, it turns in terms of plastics for Chris here. I believe there are other companies available, yes. The 3 areas I'd like to talk about, two that combined together are value for money and communications, and it was following up a little bit like Councillor Sheldon was talking about how we're going to communicate with residents. You talked earlier about the misconception of understanding, residents understanding, and coming back to your targets and ambitions. And I'm going to link this to money, if I can, or to finances. You've got a whole list of targets and ambitions, and they're very good on paper in terms of bullet points. What I'm really interested in knowing is when you release the strategy document, as you said earlier, how you are going to communicate some of those bullet points into actions and into reality. If I could just pick up on one as an example. You say we will ensure that all Essex residents have access to separate food waste collections by 2026. It's a bullet point, but I'd like to know behind that how you're going to communicate in the strategy doing that. Another one was we'll ensure that all Essex residents have access to comprehensive recycling services. I'd like to know how, coming back to the plastics and things, how you actually are going to do that. And in terms of the money side of it, this is probably one for Peter, who's not going to be happy for me to bring it up, but I'd just like to link it, if I may. Coming back to the strategy document, in the budget, there's £94 million in the revenue budget to deliver on things. And I was just looking at some of those headings in there and wondering if they could be incorporated into this strategy and linked to what I've just said about describing what that strategy will do. And in the budget, it says waste management, support services, waste strategy, recycling initiatives, waste disposal, etc., etc. There are a number of bullet points and money is set aside to deliver each of those categories in Peter's budget. And I think it might be useful to take some of those budget items and say, hey, we've got this amount of money to deliver on this particular thing, and this is how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to communicate with the residents on that. So coming back to it, all those bullet points that you've got on the targets and ambitions, I'd like to see them expanded and understood. And coming back to what was said by Councillor Shelton, because you know, if a resident is going to look at these bullet points, they're going to say, well, so what? What does that really mean? How are you going to do that? What does it mean to me? And I think it also means it in terms of how you're going to communicate that to districts, towns and city councils as well, how they can understand that a little bit more. So a bit more understanding, if you could, about how you're going to communicate, the monies that you've got to spend on it, the budget that you've got for it. Lastly, coming back to the plastics, if I may sort of just support Chris here a little bit. I did actually send out a document some time ago, and of course it's I think over 18 months, so people won't remember it. But it was called The Benefits of Recycling Plastics, and I think I just did some touch on that. And the reason I looked at that is because we also looked at highways. And just to give you the bullet points you might look at and think about going forward in terms of recycling plastics, I will just tell you about some of the studies that were done in terms of using plastics in highways. And that was, a study was found in India that by adding up to 10% of shredded plastic into asphalt, the life of those roads increased by 120%. An example was that if one study conducted also by India, who actually used shredded plastics and melted to 400 degrees and integrated into asphalt, shredded asphalt in plastics, reduced road construction by up to 8%. In other words, they were improving on the way they built the roads. And one example conducted in the UK found that using recycled plastics in asphalt can divert up to 6,000 plastic bottles per mile of road. So it's a way of saying, well, what are we going to do about all this recycling? We talked about all these plastics, and it may well be, I know that's bottles, and it may well be the black plastics that Chris has been talking about. And if you need any direction about understanding of whether that will work or not, Buckinghamshire Council have actually already adopted this. They work with companies in the UK who actually take those bottles and reshred them and feed them into it. So in a way, what we're doing, I'm suggesting there is taken away from today. Well, if we've got lots of plastics that can be recycled, there are companies out there who will recycle them, feed them into asphalt, feed them into our roads, improve our roads, and it feels it's sort of, it satisfies two requirements. It satisfies how we're going to make our highways better and how we're going to get rid of all our recycling. So those three things, the money, comms, and maybe something on the recycling there.
Peter, I fear the answer may take longer than the question.
I fear it will, and also while I welcome the comments on Councillor Vance about highways and everything, I think that's kind of basically almost outside of the reach of today's meeting, really. But I mean, good points, and it's something. I think the important point is there, and it's quite right to raise it. This is about the strategy, and of course, it's a strategy not just for the council, but also all of our district and boroughs. And we haven't got it agreed yet. I think what Councillor Vance was talking about there would fall more under the policy, so to speak. And of course, that will be one of the alternatives to develop that going forward. And obviously, other counties are looking at that. If I just before I hand over to what are we doing? You mentioned about the ambitions and targets. For example, the food waste, we're actually just about completely have rolled that out now. Already, and we're into the final process of that. And with regards to comms, we're doing an awful lot of that. We're going around from door to door on occasions, actually delivering stickers and putting it onto their bins, engaging residents if they're there, giving them caddy liners in order to encourage them to do that food waste, because that's really important, because that's part of our biodigestate that is actually energy from waste as well. So there's a lot, and you're quite right on the comms, but I think to the rest, I'm going to hand over.
I mean,
there's a lot there.
There is a lot there, but picking up on the suggestion about how do we link the strategy to action is critical.
Yeah.
And then how would we then communicate that to our residents? We fully take that on board. That's Councillor Vance will be pleased to know that was a key feedback from the consultation. It wanted to know, well, what does this mean for me? Now, that's not saying that we're going to have, at the point of adopting this strategy, a full list with timelines of every single activity that's going to happen. But what we will have is a much greater link between these are the ambitions and the targets, and then what does that mean in terms of what changes are we looking to implement? What sort of approaches are we looking to take to that? And when will we be communicating further detail to our residents around, what does that mean for them? Ultimately, this does mean, extended recycling services for residents. And that is something that we have agreement across the partnership from the individual local authorities who are part of this strategy, are already endorsing that, the approach that they need to expand their services, extend their services, so more households have access to them, and the materials that are being collected, there are more materials being collected for recycling. So ultimately, that is the difference that this will mean for residents within Essex. But equally, this approach around greater information and education, making that strong link between the action that an individual makes in terms of what they go out and purchase or what they do when they've got the waste, they're standing in their kitchen, that, choice that they make then and the impacts that has environmentally and financially across the council. So again, we will need to work that through, but yeah, we're very clear that needs to be strengthened within that final strategy document. So there is that strong link that isn't just a policy document that sits on a shelf. It's a policy document which leads to action and to change. And I think just briefly touching on this issue around the use of materials for recycling, there is the county council and the district and borough council already plugged into this, a strong piece of work being delivered by industry, but also being pushed by central government around innovation. Collecting materials for recycling is only part of the solution. You need to actually have something to do with those materials. There's no point collecting stuff separately if there's no one who wants those materials. So there's a big focus taking place at the moment in developing green businesses within the UK to be able to reprocess and make use of those separately collected materials. And some of the suggestions, that you've raised around, the use within roads, is something that is gathering greater and greater traction within the UK. So that's something that we'd certainly look to investigate and plug into if it's appropriate.
Can I just say thank you? I think it's worth emphasising that the single most expensive thing that we do in waste disposal is get rid of black bag waste. So anything that we can do to reuse or recycle means that we are saving taxpayers money. So the real emphasis on this strategy around absolutely maximising reuse and having those really ambitious recycling targets also delivers best value for the taxpayer. The most expensive thing we do is black bags, and we're desperate to get those down to the smallest possible volume.
Thank you. Again, just defending Councillor Baz, the picture of what I like about his questions were.
My long question was it? My extra long question.
We've got a book on who's going to have the longest. I think you're slightly ahead at the moment. But he did leave us with a picture, and of course the picture is of the plastic being reused and being used in something that is a constant source of discussion, which is roads. Okay, so Councillor Crowe, followed by Councillor MacGyver.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, I've no intention of trying to get in the book for the longest question. I've got two fairly brief ones, and I think you've sort of touched on the answer to the first one. I'm looking at the key principles chart, and there's between 15 and 25% of respondents disagree. Within that range, was there quite a hardcore who were disagreeing with everything and maybe just completed the consultation to send us that message? And we need to adjust and strengthen our messaging to get them on board with us. And the second question, picking up on Councillor Barker, what you were saying about furniture. I'm a couple of years behind the curve here, but I had a friend who was involved in a mattress shop, and they would sell people mattresses, and they would take away their old mattress, providing it hadn't been left there in the rain and got wet. And they had a shipping container at the back of their shop. They'd fill it up with the mattresses, and then once a month or every 6 weeks, they'd hire an HGV and a driver and get them taken down to a place in Kent that recycled them. And I remember him telling me that you could recycle 98 to 99% of a mattress. Now, are we moving towards that? Are we looking at that? I mean, you go to my local waste and recycling centre, and for the 10 minutes you're there unloading the car, it's 3 or 4 mattresses going in the skips. There's an awful lot going to landfill.
Yeah, okay. I think the first one I'll ask Katie, because that is very much in her field and she's an expert on that. Katie.
So yeah, you're entirely right. So there is a range that disagreed. There are some respondents who disagreed with everything in the strategy, and they put the same comment against every principle, but they weren't the large majority. They were a small percentage of people that did do that. What we really saw though in the disagree or in the commentary generally was differences dependent on the principle that was being addressed. So for example, on reuse, those that disagreed or not sure was very much more, this is impossible for me to do, so I haven't got a repair service made available to me, or the product I buy isn't repairable, or quite often it's too expensive to repair, it's actually cheaper for me to buy new. So you quite often saw that pulling out. So it was, although there was a small percentage of people who did have that just base disagreement, the large majority, if they disagreed, they actually took the time. I mean, it was generally more than half of respondents against each question took the time to give us their views about why they felt it was impossible for them to agree with it. And often it was very practical. And when you look at something like the educate and engage principle there, the disagreement was really about people wanting more signposting from their local council, more support in terms of how and what they can recycle or reuse, or even giving suggestions as well for what they felt they needed in their community, which is all insight that we're working with the 12 district, borough and city partnership colleagues to try and build into, well, what might this look like? And it was something Councillor Vance was alluding to, this action planning stage. Obviously, we need to go through the process we're doing now of finalising the content of the strategy and going through those adoption and governance decisions in each member authority. But we do have a weather eye on how might you then take this forward? What would action plans look like? And how do we use something like, we have a partnership brand already established, the Love Essex brand, which I'm sure you're familiar with. All 13 authorities use that brand to talk to their residents about waste reduction and recycling. How can we use that to best effect to pull out the key themes? We know that the waste hierarchy landed well with them, and that was in these principles. You can see the hierarchy layers represented in the principles that we talk to residents about, and we'll be using that going forward as well, much more so, to continue to talk to them about recycling is great, but how could you reuse that item? Reuse is great, how could you have bought differently to start with? Moving people up the hierarchy, moving the waste up the hierarchy is what we want to try and achieve. On mattresses, I think that's Jason's domain.
Mattresses, the simple answer is yes. We're already working on rolling out an approach to enable mattresses to be separated in the recycling centres. So that's something that we're hoping that we'll start trialling this year, to just work out the operational implications of managing mattresses. And you're absolutely right. Yeah, the majority of mattresses, they're bulky items to move. They're not the easiest items to move. They're not the easiest items to take apart. But ultimately, the large proportion of what is contained in a mattress, particularly when you start looking at the traditional sprung mattresses, a lot of that is obviously metal, is highly recyclable. We also have one of our district councils is looking to start a trial on the collection of mattresses separately as part of their bulk waste services for recycling. So that's kicking off again within the next few months. They will look to share those lessons with other district councils to see whether that's something that can be replicated across the county. So yeah, that is one of the difficult materials that we're currently looking very closely at.
So I forgot to add that the company in Kent pays them for the mattresses, so it's actually worthwhile them doing it.
Yeah.
Councillor Swear's got this lovely title of Czar. Unfortunately, Jason, I've got a picture in my head of you on mattresses. I just can't get rid of them, I'm afraid. Councillor McIver.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your report. And I think, global problems with local solutions is a very challenging task, and I don't envy the task you've got, but I think your report gives us some inspiration as to what we can do. And I really understand, I think it's on slide 10 of your presentation, that a zero waste county is misunderstood, because I completely understand that, because if you're not in this room, that means that as a county we're not going to produce any waste and we're all going to keep our rubbish in our homes. So I understand the misunderstanding. I think this comes down to as mentioned by other members, about language that we're using and making sure that it is public friendly and officer friendly, but public friendly. So I can understand that. And I also note on that same slide how responders want manufacturers and retailers to do their bit. And I think actually as a council, we do have a duty to work with some of the big organisations such as the airports and major shopping centres, and making sure that we are holding them to account as well, because this is for everyone to be involved with. And as a point of light, that's something that I've worked very hard with in Ongar with an organisation, and indeed it's Epping Forest wide, an organisation called Free Food for You. All of the food in the major supermarkets from Amazon to Tesco that is destined for landfill is donated to our food bank. It's then reused at no cost to anybody. It's a complete charity. And I think what that proves is that when there is demand for something, it doesn't have to go to landfill. Now, of course, we then have the challenge that packaging then goes to people's homes, and then we have to hope it then doesn't end up in a black bin. But it can be, without doubt, that food that was on a supermarket shelf was going straight into a black bin and into landfill, and we're able to curb that. So I think there's so much scope for that sort of work and that good practice to be rolled out across Essex. It's at the moment just in Epping Forest. I'm sure there's other examples, but I think that really goes to show that you can reduce the number of bin collections from big supermarkets. And finally, just on that point, when you look at other things such as car tyres, Councillor Barnes mentioned some great initiatives that can be done with plastic waste. You know, car tyres can also be mixed with asphalt, which can then be used to repair our potholes. You know, there is so much opportunity here. And I think what we have to do is seize the moment to get our residents on board that there is advantages to them if they do this. And I think that's, at the moment, this feels as though, I think the whole green agenda can feel to many residents, and I understand why maybe 15 to 20% of people just are not interested, because, and that's a lot of people, if that's Essex wide, that's a lot of people. It's almost a district and a half, you could argue. I think that the reason why is because it's been seen as a negative thing. It's been seen as something that costs people money, whether that's emissions, charging for cars, whether that's making people have lots of different recycling things in their own homes. I think people are time poor, and I think anything we can do to make it simple. But I think the easiest thing we can do is make this something that people understand the benefits to them, their lives, their families. And I think, if people are moaning about how they're having to change their tyres because they've damaged it in a pothole, which we've all been victim of, then how nice to know that actually your car tyre might get recycled and it will help fix those potholes. So I think it's about making it an understandable journey. Thank you.
No, I
think that was more statements and questions in there.
But I think what is really
pushing Councillor Vance close.
But I think what's really interesting, and again, it's something that we do recognise, is that what incentivises people to recycle is different. Different people are incentivised by different things, and we need to make this real for that individual. So again, the work that we're moving forward with is really trying to properly understand what is the motivations for an individual to do the right thing, and making that as you say, that choice real for them. So yeah, totally agree, and that's something we'll look check forward.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, this is all about innovation, which is very a key principle of our strategy as well. And it's that innovation which is really interesting, and we've heard examples from Councillor Vance and from Jamie just now. And just to give you one I heard about the other day, I was actually Ford the other day, and they're actually looking at how they're going to be totally changing the action and the materials employed in disc brakes on all vehicles, so that actually they don't cause PM 2.5 and pollution. So innovation is going to make a huge change. And this is what the strategy is also talking about, looking at the future for the next 30 years and how we can adjust.
Okay. I've got one question of my own, which I'm actually quite surprised hasn't come up.
Hope it's not too long, Chair.
Listen, I have got a long way to go. The Basildon problem with the incinerator there, or as I'm not allowed to call it incinerator, the waste for energy, that must have put us back somewhat. How are we going to recoup the time and the effort that was originally going into Basildon? Because by now we should be using Basildon.
Well, it's a good question, but slightly not what we were expecting with regards to sort of the strategy. But I'm going to ask Jason, because I'm sure he will be able to update you on your question.
Just to be clear, I think for everybody, the facility that was located in Basildon, it wasn't an incinerator. So it was a technology which pre-treated waste before it then went off to landfill. Now, I think as everyone around the table recognises that facility didn't work. We have entered into, we had a contract with the operator of that facility. And as a result of recognising that facility didn't work, we agreed to amend that contract, and that facility is now in the process of being demolished. Once that is demolished, the land that it will then be handed back to the authority, because the authority actually leases that particular piece of land. We expect that to happen later this year, at which point there will be decisions taken on what the future use of that site is. But in terms of what's happened as a result of that, yeah, it was a distraction, shall we say, in terms of being able to move forward some of our activities whilst we dealt with that particular issue. But this strategy very much, as I say, focus on now looking forward, what do we now need to do to move forward? As a result of that facility not operating, it does mean that we've had to continue to use landfill as a direct disposal route for black bag waste. But again, this strategy is now, putting us into that place where we will, make that commitment to cease the use of landfill and move forward. So, yes, it's been a distraction. It's probably caused some challenges in terms of us being able to focus our activities on the delivery of this strategy and start to move things forward. But now we've drawn a line under that particular facility. It's in the process of being demolished. It's enabled us to really strongly move forward with this strategy.
Last but by no means least, Jane.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, your current campaign that you're running, food composting, the delivery of the bags, is that across the county? Is every district receiving those bags? I got a leaflet with a sticker and the bags. I think that I didn't really appreciate at first that the new bag was actually compostable, whereas the one I received from the district council before was not compostable. So is that Essex wide or just?
Yes, that's a piece of work that has been led by Essex County Council. It's been funded by the County Council in partnership with, and we'll be delivering it in partnership with districts. It's not universal. We've been doing it with the majority of our districts. It's very much focused on districts that operate a wheelie bin service for their black bag waste, because the benefit of those aren't familiar with this intervention. What we've been doing is going out to all households in the targeted areas, placing a sticker on the top of the wheelie bin, reminding people not to put their food waste in there, providing them with a roll of compostable liners for their food waste. Again, recognising that not all authorities provide those liners, and we recognise that actually by providing liners, it encourages those that perhaps aren't participating to participate, and also providing just a short leaflet explaining the benefits of recycling food waste and also reducing your waste. It's within Malden, you're actually in tranche 3 of that programme. We've had 2 previous tranches targeting other authorities. It's due to come to an end, that particular programme of work, within the next month or so. We are then going to look at evaluating what the impact of that is, because primarily the reason for doing this is to try and get more people to participate in their food waste and to drive up the amount of food waste that's recycled rather than put in the black bag waste. So that evaluation is already taking place on the first 2 tranches. We'll do it on the 3rd tranche over the coming months. We'll be sharing that back with individual authorities. A decision will then be taken on the back of that, whether it's something that we continue to provide compostable liners, or whether it's actually had the impact. It's, everyone's participating and we can start to wind that particular piece of activity down. So yeah, we will be sharing that back with authorities over the coming months.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've reached the end of the questions. Thank you, members. It's fairly obvious to us that some of the real detail will be in the action plan. So a request from us is that as the action plan develops and goes forward, can we be involved in the process before it actually gets into the adoption stage, so that we can, hopefully you've got some answers and some points. I think we've all learned some things that we didn't know before, and hopefully you picked up some ideas as well. Is there anything you want to finish with? Sorry, Katie, Jason, and Peter. Thank you very much for your attendance and your honest and direct answer.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome the opportunity, and I think it's been, hopefully we've been able to show you the amount of work that's gone into the waste partnership, and the fact that it is a collaboration between all of those that are responsible in this for the waste. As I say, it's been 2 years' work, so it's a lot. So it's been a good opportunity to come and talk to you. And yes, we will come back, to you as a committee again with regards to the development of the action plans, as and when the waste partnership is hopefully being adopted by all districts, cities and boroughs and ourselves.
Sure, okay. I think the general public, as you quite right, 4,500 responses, that always seems small to me, but I guess that's about the level. But it is a popular subject, and I think the problem, Chris, you said, is it achievable? And I think sometimes the concept of everybody saying to you or you've got to go 100% for this to work. The net zero target is a lovely idea as long as we've not got to send any vehicles around to pick up the rubbish. So, I've attended a seminar recently from a chap from Manningtree, and I'm embarrassed I forgot his name. And he sort of took the phase further forward a bit and said instead of expecting everybody to be 100%, it would be really wonderful if everybody just took a little step every day into and I think 100% is looking around the room, well, not in my lifetime, I guess. Some of the rest of you may live that long, but if people can feel that even the smallest step collectively has if we can have that sort of concept going forward, I think we're on a winner. I congratulate you. And did I see that you were up for a trophy, something or other thingy do for stuff yesterday?
Our carbon deprioritisers project, I announced that at full council, but yes, we're up for a couple of LGA awards in various categories, but we're only on the shortlist.
So
we haven't won yet.
Yeah, we achieved our A rating from the International CDP rating for climate action, which is the absolute gold standard. And that's an international benchmark. I can wax lyrical about that for quite a long time. And we've been shortlisted for 2 categories, one net zero action and one in place for the LGC awards.
Yeah, community energy, I think it was.
Climate focus area.
Climate focus area.
Congratulations. And if you win it, bring it back here. For God's sake, don't bring it in a black bag. Thank you for your time. I'll allow you to, we just a 5-minute break, literally, because we haven't got a lot of time for you to anybody want to go for a 5 minute or not? Stretch then, just stretch.
53 flood.
Well, we're not quite yet. Nearly. Nearly.
Whose authority? My God, they used your photography this gold. I've never seen a gold. Somebody, the office is upstairs. He perched on my windowsill.
Put your ties back on. Sharp. We're in, okay. Just a small apology, today's meeting was brought forward to the 10 o'clock start, so thanks for everybody for doing that. It was meant to be a bit longer, but at the very last minute before when the agenda went out, the cycling item that we had was suddenly pulled. So originally, I thought we'd be sitting here for 25 minutes or 30 minutes until Councillor Barnes decided to extend our meeting for us all. What we've done in the best possible take. But just a bit of an apology, sorry, the cycling thing was pulled, nothing to do with us. So just a couple of things. The date of the next meeting is the 21st of March 24. Now, we've got a slight problem because there's a conference thing, something going on out there, and that may mean we have to adjust something. We're not at the moment quite. Any more update than that?
Not really, but as soon as we know more, I'll let members know. And there's an education conference due to take place the same day. There's a bit of a clash of rooms. As soon as it's resolved, I'll let everyone know.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, that would happen to be the National Literacy Conference that is taking place here at Essex County Council because of our success with the Year of Reading.
Year of reading?
Reading.
Reading.
I'm going to say.
But it wasn't for me, Mr. Chairman.
No, okay. And finally, we have received a call-in decision from a request for a call-in on North Essex Parking Partnership. We're having the standard pre-meeting round the table chat to try and resolve it without going to a full meeting. I'll be blunt, Justin and I have looked at the details, and it doesn't look like it will be a simple solution. So just to put you on notice, at some stage in the next 10 days,
Yes.
next 10 days, we may have to call another meeting just for that item.
What's the issue, Chairman?
Parking bays, charging meters in some places, not in others, linked to a budget. Yeah. We don't know a lot more, but I'll know a bit more after 2 o'clock. So any other business, anybody go around the table, anything?
Can I just declare an interest in that? Because I'm part of the call-in, so just to declare that.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody got anything? Anything over here? Okay. Can I thank Lisa? Yeah. First of all, you're always good, but this morning you were exceptionally good running around getting my printing done. Thank you very much indeed. We couldn't work without you. So with nothing else, at